All right, now earlier today, former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan was grilled about the financial crisis. Greenspan defended, though, his record at the Fed, denying that his policy to keep rates low had helped cause the crisis. Our next guest, though, says that Greenspan was at the center of the crisis and allowed the bubble to blow. Joining me now from Washington is Dean Baker, co-director at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Dean, thanks for joining us. Let me start just by asking you straight up, how much blame do you think Alan Greenspan should bear here? He wasn't, after all, in an unimportant position during the buildup.
Well, I think he bears enormous blame. He is far and away the person best positioned to stop the bubble. And rather than actually stop it, I would say he promoted it. There were several points where he insisted there was no bubble. In fact, I first began to look at the prospect very closely because I read testimony he gave in 2002 where he said, oh, everything's just fine in the housing market, and nothing he said made sense. So he had several points, I think, really encouraged the bubble, and he had all the tools. I wouldn't have raised interest rates. What I would have done had I been him was use all my power to call attention to the bubble. That doesn't mean mumble irrational exuberance. It means present the facts, have the Fed staff present the information, and throw that out at every opportunity he had to call attention to the bubble. I also would have cracked down on these crazy loans, which were not a secret. These were being issued by the millions. I knew about them. How could the chair of the Federal Reserve Board not known about them?
Hey, Dean, to be fair, though, I mean, Greenspan pointed out that the Fed had warned about subprime lending and low down payments on mortgages in 1991, again in 2001. He also apparently frequently, sounded alarms on Fannie and some of the other government-sponsored enterprises. So he did, though, raise some concerns, did he not, throughout his tenure?
That's really moot. He should have been doing this every day of the week. There was absolutely nothing more important that Alan Greenspan was doing in 2002, 2003, 4, 5, and 6 till he left office in January of 06 than calling attention to the bubble. So the fact that he can go back over things he said and did in his 20 years or whatever as Fed chair and point to a few cases where he raised issues here, that really is just kind of silly.
Listen, I think we all agree that Alan Greenspan, not an idiot, not even close. But I mean, why didn't he maybe realize that, by keeping rates so low that he was sowing the seeds, if you will, for a potential crisis? I mean, some have said he wasn't an academic, so maybe he didn't really quite understand the potential implications. Why didn't he?
I don't think being an academic. I don't think being an academic mattered one way or another. Most of the academics missed it too, in fairness to Greenspan. But I think he had an attitude. He pretty much said this. I recall a talk he gave in January of 04 at the American Economics Association convention, where he basically gave this account of the stock bubble, where he said, "Well, we saw the bubble, but we just sat back and let it run its course, and we knew everything was okay." Now, that's not my history in the sense that everything wasn't okay. The 01 recession, the recession itself wasn't that bad, but it wasn't until the fall of 03 that we started creating jobs, and even then it was only because of the housing bubble. But Greenspan was pretty open. He said bubbles are no big deal. You let them run their course, and then you pick up the pieces. And I'm sure that's what he thought with the housing bubble.
He's made the argument, and maybe so have others, that it was the securitization of those mortgages that really presented the problems, not keeping rates low.
Well, the problem was house prices, that house prices had gotten out of line and house prices were going to fall back. When you create $8 trillion of housing bubble wealth, it's basically a guarantee there's going to be some serious problems in the economy and the financial system. Now, where exactly that would fall out, could we know it's going to mean the end of Lehman, that AIG, I certainly couldn't predict, and I don't know if the Fed had the ability to predict that. But the fact that there'd be very serious problems, if you lose $8 trillion in housing bubble wealth, guarantee there's going to be some serious problems.
Dean, what do you say to people who say that Congress, Fannie and Freddie, the Community Reinvestment Act really fueled this fire from the 90s on?
Well, you really can't tell that story. I mean, the big actors in the subprime Alt-A, they weren't even covered by the Community Reinvestment Act. These were mortgage banks that were raising their money on Wall Street, they weren't traditional depository institutions, so they weren't even covered. Now, Fannie and Freddie, I was critical of them at the time. They didn't act well, but again, they were late to the game. They weren't into the Alt-A and subprime until they were losing market share, and they're trying to preserve it.
Hey, we got to run. Dean, thank you so much. Dean Baker joining us this afternoon.